Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Scotland and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel a couple of times before, albeit not in quite some time. So the last review that I did from these guys, according to the channel, was back in June of 2017. So it's been over 4 years since I reviewed anything from these guys. And it's a bit of a shame because back in the day, I always thought the quality of beer that this brewery did was very good. But this one is supposed to be a really nice beer. It's a style that I've not had from them before, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how this one turns out. And it's nice to return to these guys after quite some time. So hopefully this is another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head through towards Edinburgh. We're going to go to the south of the city to Loanhead, and we're having a look at my fourth beer from Out Brewery. So this particular beer is called the Cone. It comes in at 6.8% ABV, and this one is a West Coast IPA. So as you'll know if you've watched the channel for any length of time, I'm a massive fan of the old school West Coast IPAs. So when I saw this one on the shelf, I thought, I have to go for this. But yeah, this beer was bought from Beer Hive through in Edinburgh, which is a shop that I highly recommend. Big shout out to Fraser, who was working there on the day that I went in. I sat and chatted to him about beer for ages, but this is one that he recommended to me. I told him I liked West Coast IPAs, and this is one that he had recommended because I wanted something from this brewery, having not had something from them in quite some time. So yeah, really looking forward to this one. The last beer that I had from these guys, I believe, was the Copperhead, which is like an alt beer type thing. But yeah, that was really nice. And the beers that I had from them before were also very good. So yeah, definitely cool to feature these guys on the channel once again after such a long time. But let's see how we got on with this one then. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Out Brewery before, and we will no doubt add some more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, and you can go into the homepage and search for country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is that takes your fancy. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Scottish beers that I've reviewed for you, and that's being added to quite regularly at the moment, and beyond that whenever I get the opportunity. But as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Out Brewery then, on to my brewery notes. So, Out Brewery was founded by Michael Hopert and Philip Moo Birch back in 2013. So, Moo had previously studied biology and physics and had a background in construction, and he was the one that looked after many of the different yeast strains that they were using in the brewery's beers. Michael, on the other hand, is from Frankfurt in Germany, and he had a long career in whiskey retail, which is kind of interesting. But the brewery was originally going to be called Eclipse, but a last-minute objection from an overseas drinks producer put an end to that. And the name Top Out actually comes from Michael's love of mountaineering, and this is why all the bottles and cans and stuff like this feature genuine, things from Ordnance Survey maps. So all of the artwork is topography based, and it's taken from different Ordnance Survey maps, which is pretty cool actually, quite an interesting idea. But the original brew kit that they had was bought from Red Willow Brewery in Cheshire, and as I said, these guys are based in Loanhead to the south of Edinburgh. But they launched their brewery with a smoked porter beer, and they were assisted in the early days by Steve from Stewart Brewery, who is just down the road basically, and that really helped them get off the ground and help build their reputation. A bit later on though, in 2017, Moo left the company, and then Andy Scheib joined the company, and he's been instrumental in helping them grow over the last few years. But Andy has a background as a geologist, and he previously worked both in the UK and in Australia, and over the last few years they've just been releasing more beers and gradually increasing their fermentation capacity. So yeah, that's all I can really tell you about these guys. That was all I was really able to find out. But yeah, as I said, back in the day, these guys had some really nice beers, and they were quite diverse in the different styles that they were doing. Of course, brewing Belgian. I think the very first beer I had from them was like a Belgian Bruin or a Belgian Dubbel, or something like that. But then we had the Copperhead, and there was another beer in between that, and I forget exactly what that one was. But yeah, that is everything I was really able to find out about these guys, to be honest with you. I was able to kind of redo my notes and things for this one, but who knows, maybe we can add a little bit more to that for the next review. We'll need to see. But yeah, for the moment, like I say, that's all I can tell you about Top Out Brewery. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's get ready to have a look at the beer itself. So as I mentioned to you earlier, this one is a 6.8% West Coast IPA. The hops in this IPA are Simcoe, Amarillo and Palisade. Simcoe and Amarillo we know quite well. All three of the hops are American incidentally, but Simcoe about 12% alpha acid, lovely kind of big oily passion fruity characters when you put it in a West Coast IPA like this. It's a bit softer and juicy in a New England IPA, and it's a very good hop for black IPAs. It gives you a lot of lovely red fruity characters in there. Amarillo, as we know, that's again about 12% alpha acid if memory serves me correctly, and it's a big oily and quite zesty orangey character you're going to get from that. But Palisade was a hop that I think I've only come across once, maybe twice before actually. So I did a little bit of research on this one. So Palisade is an American hop, gives you between 5 to 9% alpha acid apparently. It's got quite a high beta acid rating as well, so it's an ideal bittering hop. Beta acids, of course, are the ones that determine how long the bitterness lasts from the beer. Of course, the alpha acids are the ones that determine kind of how bitter it is, if that makes sense. But this hop was created through the open pollination of a Swiss Tettnang variety, and it's known to give big apricot notes along with big kind of grassy characteristics as well. So yeah, like I said, a hop that I haven't had all that often, so it's going to be interesting to see how it comes out in this particular beer. But yeah, Simcoe Amarillo we know quite well, and we know the West Coast style very well as well. So yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll see how we get on. Just to let you have a little look at the artwork then before we open it up. As you can see, that lovely topographical style from Top Out, as we know, but it tells you a little bit on the back here. At the foot of the Penlands you'll find our wee brewery where we combine our German and Scottish influences to create great tasting quality beer. But we're not producing everything by hand, we're researching for our next Top Out on Scotland's wet and windy mountains. The cone is inspired by the mighty Ben Lomond, the southernmost Munro. For hop lovers who set their heights high, it's packed full of American hops and double dry hop for a strong and bitter taste with a big hit of grapefruit. Best served from the summit whilst enjoying the breathtaking view. So yeah, quite a nice wee blurb there. But yeah, 440ml can, this one. I can't remember how much I paid for this actually, but it wasn't too expensive. I ended up with about 10 beers or something for about £45 or something like that when I went into Beer Hive, because I brought a few lagers as well. I didn't just buy IPAs and things like that. But obviously we review the IPAs first for the freshness factor. But yeah, 6.8% ABV this one, West Coast IPA. And this logo that you see on the front, the Top Out Brewery thing, this is common to all of their beers, of course. Yeah, so let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. A 6.8% West Coast IPA. Could feel the pop on that there, 440ml can. A few bubbles coming out, but we'll just let it calm down and we'll get it out and into the glass. So there we go. Yeah, as I've said in other videos, massive fan of the West Coast IPA, and I'm glad to see that more breweries are having a go at brewing these again in recent times. You know, there was within the last, maybe it's died down a wee bit over the last few months, right enough, but over the last wee while there was a bit of a resurgence of you know, there was lagers. About 2 years ago, a lot of breweries in Sweden at least started brewing lagers, and they've continued doing that. But then we started to get quite a few more West Coast IPAs coming in, and some rye IPAs and some black IPAs and stuff like this. So I'm glad that the beer scene is starting to diversify a little bit in terms of styles and things like that. I'm not sure if that's related to the pandemic, but any diversification is welcome, of course, because, you know, just having hazy New Englands all the time, it can get a bit boring, to be honest, I think, as much as I do like that as a style. But yeah, as you can see, this one has poured very, very nicely. So you can see the head on this one. Let me just bring this closer to the camera so that it focuses. You can see it's got a lovely foamy head on it. I would say that's a one finger foamy head, but I would describe it as being a kind of cream colour. I don't think it's very close to being perfect white, but I think it's very slightly cream in colour. But yeah, one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there. But overall it looks very nice. In terms of colour, I would describe this one as being a kind of rich, I describe it as being a kind of rich amber, blood orangey kind of colour actually. It's got that natural haze to it which you kind of expect from the West Coast IPAs. So yeah, certainly looks the part of the style if you like. But remember, the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. This determines the magnitude of your colour. 2, the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role in that. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelize, thus you get a darker colour of beer. A standard West Coast IPA recipe is going to tell you to do a 90-minute boil in my experience, but you can get ones that are done for like 60, 75, 90 minutes. Sometimes people even do 120 minute boils, of course, like the Dogfish Head ones that you get. But yeah, as in terms of appearance for a West Coast IPA, I think this one is pretty, it kind of does the job, to be honest with you. It looks as you would expect, but a nice looking beer, this one. And as I say, the West Coast IPA is a style that I am very much a fan of, in fact. So yeah, I do like how this goes together. So nothing more we really need to say about the appearance of this one. Let's have a closer look at the aroma and see how we go. Yeah. It's actually not too pungent an aroma, I have to say. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Now, it's a bit of an odd thing to say because obviously the owners of this brewery are German, but it really reminds me of some of the German brewed West Coast IPAs that I had from like Berliner Berg Brauerei and Yankee und Kraut and stuff like this. Some of the IPAs I've had from the kind of American style breweries in Germany. This one really reminds me of it. I've always found that the German brewed ones just, they had that bready base to them, and I would suspect if it's, when it's German owners, the two brewers are Scottish though, from what I understand. I wouldn't be surprised if it's German malt that they're using. That really wouldn't surprise me at all. Probably a mix of German and Scottish malts, I would think. But it certainly does smell. The breadiness that you get out of this one just strikes me as being from German malt, and that's just experience. So I'd be curious to know what malts were in this beer. It didn't say on the website. You could have a look and it didn't tell you exactly what malts were in it. It was just the hops it said. But the malt base on this one is very nice. Now, as I've said in previous West Coast reviews, for me this style can kind of lean two ways. It can be a little bit more oily and caramelly, such as Sierra Nevada Torpedo, or it can be a little bit more kind of bready and biscuity, such as the Pliny the Elder, for example, from Russian River. So there's two different directions I think you can go in with a West Coast IPA. But the aroma on this one really isn't that pungent, actually. It's kind of interesting. It's actually more kind of oily and subtle, and I think you need to sugar it up really to get a bit more out of it. But yeah, first impression of it is that it's quite a bready IPA. A good bit of kind of grainy character to it as well, but you've also got some nice kind of oily fruits in there. It's the orange that comes out of it for me, and I would say there's a wee bit of a kind of deeper kind of pine resiny sort of thing. So yeah, it's interesting actually, and you do get quite a bit of grassiness out of it, which I'm guessing is the palisade, just from what I've read about this hop. So yeah, it's kind of an oily kind of, not subdued, humble beer, maybe we can say. But let's try and break that aroma down for you a wee bit more and describe it more in depth. So when we sugar the beer up a bit more, you can smell a mix of things out of this. Backbone of the beer is nice and bread crusty. Absolutely, you get a nice kind of slightly brown bready, wholemeal bready bread crust in there, and you do get a wee touch of brown bread in the backbone of this beer. It's almost a little bit sweet, maybe Vienna malt, I don't know. Something about it just tells me some of the slight graininess that you get off of this does make me wonder, is there a wee bit of Vienna malt in this? But on top of that, you can smell a smoother white bread, of course. But yeah, this is a big bready leaning West Coast IPA. But the interesting thing about that is that on top of that, you get a lot of oily caramel. So I do wonder if this beer is going to kind of be somewhere in the middle of the spectrum of the West Coast, between the biscuities and the oilies. Because the biscuits tend to have a bit more of a bready character to them, but this one's got breadiness and it's got a big oily note to it. So on top of the bread, you can certainly smell a big oily kind of sweet caramel. It's got a wee touch of a very slightly toasty character to it. For me, there's a lot of biscuit as well, so I do get quite a bit of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity note out of this one, but I'd say the kind of caramelly notes and the kind of booziness that it has sort of overpowers that a little bit. I'd say the biscuity notes just take a back seat to the more kind of caramelly things going on in this beer. But it certainly works. It does work really nicely, this one. So thumbs up to Top Out Brewery for the aroma of this one. This has got the authenticity you expect of a West Coast IPA. I'm not sure exactly when they produced this beer. I'm sure I did see one of the articles that I used for the research brew. I think it was talking about 2017 or something like that, and just about the time when I did my last review from these guys. I've got a feeling this beer might have been around either just before that or just after I did that review. But yeah, I think this beer has been around a wee while, so that kind of makes sense in terms of authenticity. So yeah, because I think it was about 2016 or something like that we started to get so many New England IPAs. So yeah, the authenticity of the malt base in this one is very, very nice in that sense. It smells like properly old school. That's what I mean by authenticity. But on the hoppy side of things, there's a nice little bit of earthiness to this beer. You do get a little touch of earthiness out of this one, but not too pungent. There's a nice green component to it as well, nice deep floral aromatic characters. I don't find this one overly kind of spicy, but like I said, the aroma of this beer strikes me as being quite subtle and subdued in a lot of ways. It's not the most pungent of aromas. But yeah, on top of that, you get a nice kind of grassy character coming out of it, and there's also a little bit of there's also a nice little bit of a kind of leafy, like wet leafy kind of vibe to this one as well. But with Palisade, as we say, it's supposed to be a more grassy hop, so in some ways that kind of makes sense. But yeah, that's interesting green component to this one, as we say. But the fruity side of the beer, I would say, is what you would expect. You can smell a bit of a sort of dried apricot underneath this one, but I would say the most pungent note you get out of this is a big, oily and quite zesty orange. And for me, that's what I've always got from Amarillo. Amarillo was it still is one of my favourite hops, I would say. But I love Amarillo in West Coast IPAs. I think it just, it just hits the spot for me. But yeah, you do get a wee bit of a more kind of oily passion fruity note in there as well. You can smell that the tropical side of this one has that wee bit of passion fruity character from the Simcoe. There is a bit of that dried apricot note in there, and for me otherwise it's a big oily orange. So in a lot of ways I'm kind of getting what I expected from the hops, but I would say that the fruity side of this beer really leans towards that oily orange side of things rather than anything else. But yeah, as I always say, take a bit of time to take in the aroma. This one is quite a subtle beer, so you do need to sugar it about and let it open up. But let's get the rest of this beer into the glass, and we'll see how we get on with this one then. Curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Let me just line that up so that my OCD is happy. I think that's nice. There we go. But yeah, let's have a taste of this beer then. So this one is the Cone, a West Coast IPA coming in at 6.8% ABV from Top Out Brewery in Loanhead to the south of Edinburgh here in Scotland. Let's get stuck into this one. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Yeah. That's pretty solid actually. So thumbs up to Top Out Brewing once again. They've done a good job here. Yeah. It's got a wee bit of graininess and stuff to the malt base, which I wasn't really picking up in the aroma in a sense to the same degree. So the graininess is a wee bit more kind of prominent in this one. It's not quite as sweet as I thought it was going to be, but it's certainly got a wee bit of booziness to it. It certainly has a wee bit of that West Coast IPA boozy kick to it. I dare say if I tried this one blind, I would probably think this was a bit stronger than it actually is. I might think this was like a double IPA. Because it does actually, it feels a bit boozier, it tastes a little bit boozier in the mouth than it actually is. And 6.8%, quite a few, at least in Sweden, and I think even in Denmark as well. Most of the beers I normally drink on the channel are Swedish and Danish, of course, with other random things that come in. But 6.5% is the normal strength for an IPA in Sweden and in Denmark quite often as well. But yeah, 6.8% isn't the boozy end really of the West Coasters. I mean, if I think back in the day, I'm sure Jackhammer from Brewdog was like 7.5%, and Hardcore IPA, which was a double, was about 8.2 or something like that. So yeah, this beer, to me at least, it does actually feel a little bit boozier than it actually is. So let me know your own thoughts about that in the comment section below. But that's the first impression of this one. But overall, quite a grainy, bready West Coast IPA again. It does have a bit of the booziness you expect. The green component is actually a bit more pungent in the flavour for sure, but the fruits are kind of oily, as you'd expect. So this is one of these beers where the flavour that you get doesn't really match the aroma, but the aroma itself isn't too pungent, so it's hard to make that judgment, to be honest. But let's try and break the flavour for you, break it down for you a little bit more kind of succinctly. So yeah, yeah, malty side of things then. This beer actually really does have a good wee bit of graininess in the back of the palate there, but I think some of that might be coming from the yeast, just going from the kind of type of flavours that you're getting out of this one. But yeah, straight away across the middle of your palate then, you can feel that sort of grainy, bread crusty backbone there. That blankets the middle third of your tongue and the back third of your palate. On top of that, there's certainly a wee bit of a kind of brown bready character to this one. On top of that, you do get a bit of a kind of white bready character, and this is on both middle third and back third of your palate, but certainly towards, remember, with your palate you have this spectrum, the kind of more bitter flavours come out at the back of the palate and the sweeter things come out a bit further forward, and this is what you're getting in this beer. So these flavours get a bit more intense, these kind of grainy flavours I'm talking about get a bit more intense towards the back end of the palate, but for the moment let's focus on the middle third of your tongue. So middle third of your tongue, as we said, grainy bread crust, brown bread, a little bit of white bread. On top of that, you're getting the nice kind of brown sugary elements out of the beer. So on top of that, you can feel the nice kind of sweet caramelly notes out of this one. And as I said, I find this to be quite a boozy feel. It really has quite a bit of boozy character to it, this West Coast IPA, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But yeah, really strikes me as having a nice little bit of boozy character to it. So in the middle of your palate then, you get this big circle where the brown sugary elements come out of the beer, but the middle of that circle is right at the kind of dead centre of your palate. So if you start there, you can feel the sort of concentrated boozy brown sugars in there, and that is the alcohol coming out of the beer. It's just got that little bit of dryness to it that you always get. But when you move further out from that, it does give you a wee bit more of a kind of toasty brown sugary note there. Then as you move further and further out to the sides in this one, it certainly has a wee bit more of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity thing, and it sweetens up a wee bit as well as you move out to the extremities of that middle third of your palate. Towards the front of that middle third of your palate, there is a slight sort of woody kind of thing. There is a little bit of a slight woody character to this one, which I can really enjoy. So yeah, I do like how all of that goes together actually. So the malty side of this beer I think is very, very nice. So yeah, the brown sugary notes, yeah, it's quite toasty. As I say, quite toasty and brown sugary, and just quite, grainy and stuff as well. You do get more and more of that kind of graininess and booziness out of this beer the further you go into the aftertaste. So yeah, this is kind of interesting how this goes together. I did expect it to be a little bit sweeter from the aroma. I thought this was going to have a big oily sweetness out of it, but it surprises me how much kind of grainy character you're getting coming out of this one. But with the way the flavours are in this beer, I think it's maybe a wee bit to do with the yeast as well, actually, because you're getting a lot of these kind of notes from the back of the palate in this one as well. So yeah, let's leave it at that for the kind of middle third of your palate, and we'll go on to the back third. So border region between middle third and back third of your palate, again you get a wee bit of a kind of bready build up in there, a bit more of a kind of bread crusty quality. Then as you go into that back third of your palate, you certainly get the graininess of the beer. The bread crusty notes sort of intensify, if you like. The brown bread gets a bit more grainy, the white bread gets a little bit grainier as well, and on top of that you get that big yeasty quality. So I like how that goes together. The yeasty notes for me are quite sort of dense and bready and fluffy in a sense. So yeah, the way that goes about its business, I think, is quite interesting. So yeah, you can feel that when you start at the back of the palate with this beer, the flavour's quite tall, it condenses down, and as you go into the middle third of the palate, just the flavours get a bit denser and more dense, as you quite often find with these beers. But yeah, I think that works. So on the hoppy side of things then, back corners of the palate, you've got a nice wee bit of earthiness in there, absolutely. And then as you move further forward, you can feel there's a wee touch of herbal quality there, which I think might come from the Palisade, because I don't remember Simcoe or Amarillo being really too herbal. But as you push further forward, you get a nice big deep floral aromatic note out of this one, and I think I do think that is how I think that comes from the Simcoe and the Amarillo in this one, a big deep floral aromatic note. So yeah, the way that goes together is really quite nice. Round the front curve of the palate, it's certainly lighter and grassy, and it's more of a kind of wet, leafy type note out of this one. So I do like how that goes together, to be honest with you. Nice big wet leafy character, big kind of zesty, well, it's not a wee bit, the zesty orange there helps make the grassy characters feel a wee bit more zesty in a sense. So there's a wee bit of zestiness to the grass, but for me the grassiness is quite wet and leafy, and again I think that's due to the Palisade. I suspect the Palisade is maybe the bittering hop out of these ones, whereas the other ones are more kind of aroma hops and things like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if they've been used in the early edition stage as well. Remember, West Coast IPAs, they have a lot of late edition and a lot of dry hopping usually as well, which are the flavour and aroma parts of the beer. But you do get a lot more early edition hopping in these beers, and that's where you get the bitterness from, early editions during the wort boil. So yeah, this one does have a wee bit of bitterness. It's not the most bitter West Coast IPA that you're going to come across, but it does have that wee bit of hoppy kick to it, so that's worth bearing in mind. But yeah, I do like how this beer goes together in that sense. But yeah, fruity part of the beer in this one is pretty nice as well. I think we've said everything we need to about the green component of this, but let's focus on that front third of your palate then. So border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, bit of a bready build up there, bit more kind of intensity in the grains. Base of the front third of your palate is a wee bit more kind of it is a wee bit more sort of you get a bit of the kind of brown bready character underneath it, you get a bit more of the kind of graininess there, but then on top of that you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. And for me, this one, at the back of the palate you get a bit of a sort of intense citrusy kind of thing, so you can feel the kind of oily, quite powerful passion fruity notes from the Simcoe, but as you move further forward it does give you a wee bit of that sort of dried apricot-y character. But as you reach the middle of that front third of your palate, you can feel as you transition into the front, you get that big oily orangey character from the Amarillo. So yeah, and the orangey notes that are in this one are big and oily, quite deep, but you also get that wee bit of zestiness from just right on the tip of the tongue, and it does give the grassy part of the green component just a little bit more zest, if you like. So yeah, this is an interesting beer from that side of things. There's a lot of nice talking points when it comes to this particular beer, but it gets a thumbs up from me. This is quite an interesting West Coast IPA, but a lot more grainy than I thought it was going to be from the aroma. But let's round off the review with the mouthfeel then. Let's look at that. So yeah, the aroma of this beer for me then, I'd say that this beer is kind of pushing towards the top end of mid-bodied. The carbonation is fairly smooth. You do get a feeling of kind of cleanliness out of this beer, and that's kind of interesting. When it comes to this beer though, it's a bit difficult to talk about the IBUs and stuff like this, because I think this beer's got quite a bit of grainy character to it, and that really blends into, in a sense, with the with the sort of with the bitterness, the IBUs, with the green component of the beer. So there's a big, as we say, there's a big floral component to this one. This beer actually feels as if it's quite high in IBUs, you know, like 70, 80. I wouldn't be surprised if it's up that end of the spectrum, if you like, but there's quite a bit of graininess in there that kind of amplifies the effect in a sense. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this is about 70, 80 IBUs. But remember, IBU counts are my weakest point of beer reviewing. Always take them with a pinch of salt. But the malt, as we say, the base of it is quite grainy and dry. On top of it, you get some smooth bread. There's a degree of sweetness to this one, a bit of booziness. Like I say, this beer feels a bit boozier than it actually is at only 6.8%. But then you've also got a nice kind of oily, fruity character to this one. And I'd say that it is actually fairly balanced between the tropical and the more kind of citrusy side of things. But the further you go into the aftertaste, I think it leans more towards the Amarillo and gives you a wee bit of zestiness too. But this is an interesting beer, and I'm glad that I got to review this one, and I'm also glad that I got to return to Out Brewery after such a long time. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. There we go. So yeah, this one was the Cone, 6.8% West Coast IPA from Out Brewing in Loanhead to the south of Edinburgh. Really cool to have these guys on the channel once again after 4 years. Couldn't believe it was so long. But yeah, thank you to Fraser at Beer Hive as well for this recommendation. But there we are. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. I'm sure we'll return to these guys at some point soon. But in the meantime, do make sure you check out their social media, check out my social media. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Out Brewing. And we will return to these guys at some point soon, I'm sure. But this was really nice. I enjoyed this one. The Cone West Coast IPA, 6.8% ABV. Definitely worth a try. Quite a grainy one. And definitely quite different from the impression I had from the aroma. But yeah, thanks again for watching. See you guys in the next review. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.